Hi, let's talk about defense mechanisms a little bit today. Defense mechanisms are the tools that the ego has because the ego has a pretty tough job. It's got to keep the peace between the id and the superego. So let's talk a little bit about the defense mechanisms. The first one is repression, and with repression you're talking about an involuntary removal of unpleasant memories. If you were doing this on purpose, consciously, that would not be repression. This is when you're not consciously doing this. You're not aware that you're doing this. So one of the defense mechanisms I wanted to mention was repression. I want to talk about projection as well. With projection, it's like a projector. The source of the words may be here, but you see the image on the screen elsewhere. With projection, you are attributing your own undesirable traits and impulses onto other people. You don't see that you have the problem, you see it in other people. It's kind of like the expression, the teapot calling the kettle black. Well, the teapot and the kettle are made of the same material, but you don't see it in yourself, you only see it in the other. Denial, another defense mechanism. This is where you don't acknowledge consciously a threat or a dangerous situation. It's just not there. As far as you're concerned, it's not an issue. It may be an issue, you just don't want to deal with it, so you're in denial. Rationalization. This is supplying a logical, reasonable explanation rather than the real reason for an action. I'm trying to think of a good example for you, and sometimes I find myself rationalizing about what I'm eating. I just had quiche for lunch, and I can rationalize those calories saying, oh, this was all healthy stuff. Well, you know you hit rock bottom when you start rationalizing something like chocolate cake, saying, oh, it's got eggs and milk in it, it must be a health food. No, chocolate cake is not a health food. That's rationalizing. Regression is when you go back to an old pattern of behavior that used to work for you. This is most typically seen when you bring home your second child. Your first child, who has been off the bottle and not in the crib anymore and is potty trained, all of a sudden feels threatened by the new addition. I can understand that. I think I'd be threatened if my husband brought home a younger, cuter wife, so I could certainly understand why a child would be threatened by a younger, cuter child. So your firstborn is now threatened. Don't be surprised if this child now starts to act in ways that he used to act like when he was, the only pebble on the beach. So now this older child might have potty accidents. The older child might want to sleep in the crib again. The child is regressing. He's feeling threatened, so he's going back to an old pattern of behavior that used to work for him. Reaction formation. This is expressing exaggerated ideas and emotions that are the opposite of disturbing unconscious impulses and desires. And a real cute example of that is the little boy who's got a crush on a little girl, but he can't tell her because that's too scary. So what does he do? He hits her, he trips her, he pushes her down. It's the exact opposite of what he's feeling. He likes her, but he can't tell her he likes her, so he trips her. Displacement, substituting a less threatening object for the original object of an impulse. If I get mad at you and I yell at you, then my anger is appropriately placed. But if I get mad at you and I take that anger and I yell at somebody else, then it is being displaced. Let me give you an example of displaced aggression, and you can have displaced affection too, but let's talk about displaced aggression. The cliche example would be the man who has a bad day at work, his boss gives him a hard time. Well, he can't afford to yell at his boss. If he yells at his boss, he's going to get fired. So what does he do? He takes it. Then he comes home and he yells at his wife. The wife then turns around and yells at the kid. The kid turns around and kicks the dog. Everybody looks for a weaker victim, and you displace your anger. And you all know what I'm talking about. If a cop pulls you over and gives you a ticket, you don't yell at the cop. You're very polite to the cop, but when the cop drives away, you go yell at your passenger. You displace all of that onto your passenger. And sublimation. This is rechanneling sexual or aggressive energy into socially acceptable pursuits. Let's first talk about aggressive energy, and then I'll talk about sexual energy. With aggressive energy, we see this, for example, with children on the playground. We don't want kids fighting on the playground. So what we try to do is we try to rechannel that energy into something that is socially acceptable, like sports. So we tell our kids, you can't fight on the playground, but here, let's give you boxing gloves and you can knock each other out. or you can tackle each other on the football field, or whatever. There are rules to sports, and there is a referee, so things don't usually get out of hand. Whereas if it's on the playground or in the back of some building somewhere, things can get pretty bad. Sexual energy. This is a little bit more challenging to explain. I'm going to do it in a G-rated fashion. You might be in a committed relationship, for example, and you and your significant other go to a movie, or you go to a play, or you're at a party, and there's somebody who's very attractive that really turns you on. Well, if you're in a committed relationship, you're supposed to remain faithful to your partner. And it's not socially acceptable for you to engage in stalking behavior or anything like that. So what do we do? Well, you may go to a movie and you may be turned on by the hottie on the screen, but if you're in a committed relationship, you're supposed to remain faithful to your partner. So let me see if I can explain this in G-rated terms. It doesn't matter where you build up an appetite, as long as you eat at home. Thanks.